All right, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm hoping panelists can hear me and give me the heads up. Them sounding all right? Are you working? Awesome. I'm Tom. I'm the Executive Director of Alachua Conservation Trust, and I want to welcome you to tonight's webinar presentation. We originally planned this thing. We were hoping to have Dan and Tom out at our Prairie Creek Preserve and Lodge, where we have our offices here in Gainesville, Florida. And of course, things have changed, and we've been willing to adapt, and everyone's learning. So I think this is something we would have tried as an organization maybe further down the line, but sometimes situations push us this way, and so we're grateful that Dan and Tom are willing to do this tonight, and really grateful to them for willing to do their presentation online with us. So with that, I want to thank those two. Heather O'Barr will be doing the sort of formal presentation, or I guess introduction of them. But just want to say thank you, everybody. Welcome them. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, maybe I saw some people are calling in from different parts of the country. We're a local land trust that works in about 16 counties all across North Central Florida. We've got some other projects a little bit outside that around the state as well, but primarily in 16 counties in North Central Florida. And a big part of what we work on these days is around our springs. I mean, our water is super critical to us as a state, and to the people for drinking water, as well as for wildlife and recreating. And some of those things will be hit on by Tom and Dan during their presentation. But really grateful for everything that's going on. It's as crazy as things are at this point in time. All of our projects are continuing to go forward, so that's really great. No one is bad. We've got about 24 different conservation projects going on all throughout our region. A lot of them along the Santa Fe River. And one of the ones we're highlighting tonight is Santa Fe Springs. And Melissa Hill, who's our Santa Fe Springs, I guess really Santa Fe River Basin specialist and coordinator, thanks to a Healthy Watershed Consortium grant, is going to talk a little bit more about that project.
Yeah, so my name is Melissa Hill, and it's a pleasure to digitally meet all of you. I hope you're all doing well during this time, and we're really excited to be gathered to talk about not only just the Santa Fe River, but really honing in on Santa Fe Springs and this project that has really been a priority of the state and a lot of different agencies for over a decade now. And just to sum it up, it's 254 acres right on the Santa Fe River, where it, right at the confluence with the Lusty Creek. It protects close to 1.3 river miles. And on this property, there are 2 freshwater springs, which you are going to hear a lot more about during the talk tonight. But I just want to say that this project is really important. ACT, like Tom said, has been around for over 31 years now. And in that time, we've helped to protect over 53,000 acres of land. But I think something that's really special about this project is just how much it does matter. It's 2 freshwater springs, direct connect to our drinking water, to the overall health of this ecosystem, this incredible river that you're going to hear a lot about. And we've been able to gain so much traction on this project. To complete it, it's close to $1.4 million. And we have gained support from local partners like the Swanee River Water Management District, from grant-making agencies like the Conservation Alliance, from Private Family Foundation, but most importantly, from people like you. It is incredible how much $1, $10 matters to these types of projects. We leverage every dollar that's donated to make sure that incredible places get permanently protected. So with that in mind, I would love to encourage all of you to please support this project any way you can. $1 goes a long way, and more obviously goes further, but any way you can join in and support us. Being here tonight is a huge show of support for us, and we're really grateful. And there's an opportunity to text to donate, so you don't have to leave the webinar. You can text Santa Fe Springs, all one word, to 44321. And we're just so appreciative of your time and your interest in this project, and we can't wait to share it with you.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm Heather O'Barr. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator for ACT. And I have the pleasure of just going over the format for tonight and also introducing our panelists. So we're going to get into the presentation in a few minutes. The presentation's about 20 minutes long, and we've actually pre-recorded the presentation with Tom and Dan to make sure that we don't have any issues this evening. That was a really good option for us, so that's what we're gonna do. And Melissa will be sharing her screen with everybody so that you guys can see it. During the presentation, if you have questions, please feel free to either enter those questions into the chat box, or you can also, there's a question and answer section at the bottom of your screen that you're more than welcome to send your questions to. I'll be looking at those questions throughout the presentation and taking them down. And then after the presentation is ended, we're gonna all come back. We're gonna mute our cameras during the presentation, and then we'll all be back to answer questions, and I'll be helping to facilitate that. So without further ado, I'd just like to introduce our our speakers tonight, and have them say hello to you guys briefly before Melissa turns her screen over so everybody can see the presentation. So first up, we've got Tom Morris. Tom is a biologist and cave diver. He's explored many of Florida's cave systems as an underwater researcher, and he's appeared in numerous documentary films, including Water's Journey, Hidden Rivers of Florida. And that is the shortest bio I have on Tom, so he can probably say a few more words. His bio is much lengthier than that when I turn it over to him to say hello. And then we also have Dan Rountree. He is a native of Gainesville with a degree in photography from the University of Florida. He's also the president of Current Problems, which is another local nonprofit dedicated to cleaning the inland shores and waterways of North Florida. He has been canoeing local rivers for 30 years and has traveled extensively around the United States, camping and hiking in national state parks and wilderness areas. So I'm just going to turn it over to each of them to say hello, and then we'll get the presentation started.
Hello, my name is Dan. I enjoyed working on this project with Tom. We got to explore some great areas and sit down, and hopefully you'll enjoy the presentation.
Hello,
Hello.
this is Tom. Anyhow, it was fun working on this thing with Dan. I'm getting used to this format, excuse me. So hello, friends and strangers. I'm glad you're here, and please donate a little money to this project. I think they got a real good deal on it. And I'm a born in Florida Floridian, and I love this state, and I love the stuff that Alaska Conservation Trust is doing to help preserve part of it. That's it.
All right, thanks guys. We're gonna turn it over to the presentation. And if you know of anybody who wanted to tune in tonight and couldn't, we are at capacity, which means we don't have any more slots right now for this presentation, but we are recording the presentation for folks to take a look at it later on. So without further ado, we're gonna get started.
Hi, I'm Tom Morris.
And I'm Dan Rountree.
And Alaska Conservation Trust has asked us to put together a little program about their latest acquisition, the Santa Fe Spring up in the upper Santa Fe River. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the spring and its place in the landscape, and then talk about the recreational opportunities that are present up and down the river from the spring. This is a location map of the project. It's located at the confluence of Olustee Creek and the Santa Fe River. Note that the Olustee Creek and the New River are the major tributaries of the Santa Fe. Below the river rise, the Santa Fe flows through a dry, karst landscape at about 50 feet of elevation, and is characterized by a thin layer of porous sand over porous limestone. There is little surface drainage in the lower basin. The drainage is underground in the limestone. Consequently, many springs line the river between the river rise and the Swanee River. In the upper Santa Fe, above Olena, the Santa Fe and its tributaries flow on top of many feet of clay and are isolated from the underlying limestone. The river has eroded down to the bedrock near Santa Fe Spring, and here we have the most upstream Florida aquifer spring on the river. And here it is, the Santa Fe Spring. This is one of the larger spring basins on the Santa Fe River. That baby's about 200 feet in diameter, and it has about a 100-foot run that runs out into the Santa Fe. And if you look closely,
you can kind of see the mixing of the clearer spring water with the dark water of the Santa Fe River down below the run's confluence with the river. So here we are at ground level. Part of the spring basin has a nice sandy shoreline, but at the top of the photo, the basin walls are vertical and up to 20 feet high. Spring discharge exits the basin to the right of the image.
You can see the 2-meter spacing of the horizontal transect line where I floated across Santa Fe Spring with a handheld sonar, creating a profile of the bottom.
But that's not the whole story. Dan recorded depths up to 60 and 70 feet deep on his transect, but down in the bottom left of the basin is where the cave discharges into the spring basin, and depths down there reach 150 feet. There are a number of trees that have fallen in over the years and are laying around in the mouth of the cave and are rather well preserved in the low oxygen water of the spring. Hey, when I first started coming to the spring, when I first discovered it, I would ask some of the locals around here what the name of the spring was. Some of them would say it doesn't have a name, and others would say it's Graham Spring. Well, that would be after Mr. Graham, who used to live in that house. He was an old fellow when I was going there, and he's gone by now. And his house has since burnt down. He used to call this thing Blue Springs. Here we are looking up the run towards the spring basin. The previous video shows the spring discharging a nice flow of relatively clear water. This spring is one of the few springs with historically low levels of nitrate, which can cause nuisance growths of filamentous algae. So where is all this water coming from? When we first started exploring this area, we thought it might be coming from the Olustee Creek Swalette Complex, a series of sinkholes in the bed of the river. But on further investigation, we realized there was not near enough water going down there, and it was a much different water quality than what's coming out of the Santa Fe Springs. Now we think the Swalettes on Olustee Creek rise again in its own creek bed just below the Swalettes.
Lars and I only got 15 feet into the cave when it became a squeeze beyond our abilities as cavers. The cave is formed in mixed clay and limestone, and when we considered that there was no water to support the roof, we became very nervous. So even though this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, we bailed.
A nearby swallet, higher in the surrounding uplands, is quite a bit prettier than the riverbed swallet. The waterfall is plunging off the clay surface into a collapse in the hawthorn group. Alachua Conservation Trust is considering putting in a canoe launch at the County Road 18 bridge, but it may not be usable during low water. Santa Fe Springs has been reverse flowing long enough to collect a nice cover of duckweed. Things like leaves that get waterlogged will sink to the bottom, but duckweed has special tissue which allows it to float on the surface, and it doesn't get sucked down during periods of reverse flow. Duckweed can be an important food source for catfish and turtles. You can think of it kind of like an overhead pasture.
Santa Fe Springs is quite dynamic. On a summer day in 2007, I measured 11-meter visibility. 2 weeks later, it was milky with only 8-meter visibility and a strong hydrogen sulfide smell.
The Santa Fe Spring Cave is trending towards the Robinson Sinks, a cluster of very large sinkholes. The water in the sinkholes is perched many feet above the spring and river level, indicating that at best there is only a minor hydraulic connection to the underlying cave conduits that help form them. A review of delineated spring sheds and artesian surface maps suggests that the spring shed of Santa Fe Spring lies to the northeast. Did you notice garfish gulping air in the video? They do this when oxygen levels are too low for most other fish to survive. Needless to say, the water in the cave is near anaerobic, and bacteria that coats most of the cave surfaces is the only life present. There used to be steps on the live oak arching out over the spring so people could jump into the water, but you might want to think twice. A number of times that I've paddled into this basin, a solid 10-foot alligator slides from its sunning position down into the water. Often alligators will come back up and take a look at what's going on, but this one never seems to do that. It just stays down on the bottom, and they can stay down there for a long time.
Hey, Tom, what you thinking?
Oh, I'm just sitting here trying to figure out what to go look at next on this new preserve. These are mature Eaton's palms. This is about as big as they get. They are close related to the much larger cabbage palm. Eaton palms have a trunk of sorts, but it is underground. There, the all-important terminal bud is protected from the catastrophic fires that are characteristic of the habitat that this plant evolved in. The sand pine scrub found on Florida's ancient sand dunes. This is a highly unusual occurrence of this palm. There is an ephemeral pond on the property that supports a beautiful stand of cypress. In places where the water fluctuates a lot, cypress trees tend to assume that Coke bottle shape to their trunks. This small seepage spring is located only a short distance upstream of our big spring, but it has been formed by an entirely different process. The porous sandy soil in the nearby uplands is underlain by impervious clay. Rainwater trickles through the sand, collects on the clay, and flows to the seep in small top of the clay channels. The bottomland and flood channels on the property support some fine live oaks. Consider this. Live oak wood weighs up to 65 pounds per cubic foot. It is the second heaviest wood in Florida. How in the heck do they manage to remain standing with so much weight cantilevered out so far? The Columbia County shoreline in the vicinity of the preserve consists of high sandy banks over 20 feet high. But on the other side of the river, the bluffs rise an impressive 90 feet, which is some of the highest relief in Alachua County. The Santa Fe River is the ultimate turtle river in North America. It has over 12 native species of turtles. And it's just not species of turtles, it's numbers of turtles. You can expect to see lots and lots of turtles basking on logs in the vicinity of the spring. The turtles you see on this log are Sewanee cooters. You can tell by the chevron on the bottom shell of the turtle on the right, just underneath his head, that nice V. Alligator snappers are a super cool component of the fauna of the Santa Fe River, and in fact, they occur all the way on up the river and up past the spring. Scientists have captured several turtles that weigh well over 100 pounds in the vicinity of the spring. Taxonomists have decided that the turtle we have in the Suwannee drainage, which includes our Santa Fe turtles, are now a separate species, Macloclemys suwanniensis. Do you have any idea what this is? A local hunter told me he didn't either, so he shot it. So you guys figure it out. Here's a hint. It is the world's largest rodent, and they are loose along the upper Santa Fe River.
The stretch of the river between the Santa Fe Springs and Vincennes Landing Swallow is the only part of the upper Santa Fe River that constantly flows. The rest of the river goes stagnant during severe droughts. The hydrology of the Santa Fe is so unique. During the 2000 drought, only the stretches of river shown in blue were flowing. The rest of the river system was stagnant or only had insignificant flow. This map clearly shows how the Santa Fe River is eroding its valley up into the high elevations of the Northern Highlands Plateau. This was the period Lars and I explored the Alesti swallows.
When paddling downstream from Santa Fe Spring, the Bible Camp Road boat ramp adjacent to I-75 is the main takeout point. It is also the launch point for journeying downstream to Olena State Park. This is a great wading and sunbathing spot when the river is low. All right, let's head on down to Olena and check out the interesting hydrology and the stunning beauty of this stretch of the river. This is the siphon located 1 mile below I-75 that takes down the entire flow of the Santa Fe River during extreme droughts. It's kind of a fun place to take a swim if you've got the nerve. Drops down about 20 feet, runs out for 400 or 500 feet, it's in that direction, and drops down to 180 feet. The takeout point in Olena is near the suspension bridge, but check with park management to assure that it is open. And by the way, check out the duckweed that is collected in the river above the swallow, the mighty Olena swallows.
All righty, so we've got a few questions that came in during the presentation. I want to thank both Dan and Tom for doing such an awesome presentation. And we're going to have that available for everybody after in a few days online. So if we had connectivity issues or if it was a little slow at places, we'll have that full presentation for everybody online. And you can watch it at your leisure. So some of the first questions we got is actually from Andrew. He asks, you mentioned the swallets weren't the source of the spring. So what is the source?
The source of the spring is a spring shed located, we think, to the northeast. I mentioned in the video that looking at some of the other spring shed maps that have already been delineated, and of course, you know, there's a lot of guesswork in this stuff, and looking at potentiometric maps, it appears that the groundwater flow is from the northeast. But we don't really have a good idea how big that spring shed is. There are some methods we can use to maybe estimate its size and where the water might be coming from, but that was a little bit beyond what we did on this little project.
Yeah, and I'll also just add for folks that maybe aren't familiar with all the Florida terminology, a spring shed, like Tom is mentioning, is the area of land that is directly connected to kind of the immediate hydrology. So it's the source of a lot of where that water is coming from, and those areas directly influence the amount of pollutants that arrive there as well as water levels.
Yeah, Melissa, I might want to add that the cave that feeds the spring is trending out towards the Robinson sinks. That's a cluster of really big sinkholes. Some of these guys are over 300 feet across, 30 feet deep. Their bottoms are sealed. They're no longer connected with the groundwater below. If they are, it's very imperfect. But the cave down there is big. We did some measurements inside, and it's 8 feet high and 20 feet across, and there's lots of sand down there. And we think all that sand came right out of those Robinson sinks. So it's probably going to arc under the sinks and then head off to the northeast somewhere.
And this is Tom K. One of the things I'd note too, it's interesting, and Tom or Dan might know a little bit more about this, but from our first initial meetings with Water Management District out there, right now the average daily flow out of the main spring there is 44 million gallons a day. So they do a test, they do a monitor it for several days, and then take that average. It was about 44 million gallons. It's sort of interesting. I think up until 2009, maybe that's where Dan or Tom can correct me, it was at about 52 million gallons a day. It was at one time considered a first magnitude spring, and now it's a second magnitude spring, by the way. The Water Management Districts qualify them.
Yeah, the first magnitude springs are the big boys, right? Over 100. I don't think in million gallons a day. The numbers are too big for me. So I think in cubic feet per second. And so one time they had a recorded flow of 150 cubic feet per second. And I think the average flow is around 50 cubic feet per second. To put that in perspective, Jenny Springs, which I think many of the audience are familiar with, the average flow there is 35 or 40 cubic feet per second.
All righty, we've got some great questions coming in. I'm just reading all of them, trying to figure out which one to pick. And we may not get to all the questions tonight, and that's just because we're time limited to ending at 7 o'clock. We want to make sure everybody can get out of here at 7. But I have one from Gary who asked, can you talk a little bit more about how special the Santa Fe is to turtles?
Oh gosh, I could wax on about this one. We've got a really cool biologist by the name of Jerry Johnson. He's a professor over at Santa Fe College. And for a number of years now, he and a whole bunch of his cohorts and volunteers have been studying the turtles of the Santa Fe. There are over, it's either 12 or 14, I forget exactly, native species of turtles in that river. There's no other river in the North America, maybe the whole world, that can have that many turtles in its basin. And there's some really neat ones, like I showed you a picture of the alligator snapper. There used to be only considered to be one species of alligator snapper. And that had its range up the Mississippi River and over into the Santa Fe drainage. And that's the easternmost extent of the range of the alligator snapper. Well, the biologists have known for quite a while, the herp guys, that these turtles have some unique features, the ones in the Santa Fe River. And so they have split, and DNA evidence is bearing this out. but they have split that one species up into three. So we have the old species, and then Macroclemys apalachicola and Swanniensis. So I think that's kind of cool that the Swanee drainage has its own species of one of the largest turtles in the whole world. Oh, some people worry about wading around and getting bit by alligator snappers, but they're completely inoffensive. They just sit down there on the bottom with their mouth open. When you see pictures of people holding them, they've always got that mouth hanging open. It's not like they're being aggressive and trying to bite you. It's kind of what they do naturally. And they feel, when they're in the water, they don't feel threatened at all by humans, and they're not going to bother you. They're not going to bite your toes off, even though they could.
So I've got a lot of questions about the rodent that was in the slideshow. Everyone says, is it a capybara? So will one of you please enlighten us on what was in that slideshow, and do they occur anywhere else along the Santa Fe River?
Dan, go for it.
Well, it is a capybara, and we spotted some when I was floating with Tom and some people from the Swanee River Management District. And we happened to be there evidently early enough in the morning, and I could show a video of them, but it'd be more like, see that little speck running through there? That's a capybara. But there was a small family of them, probably about 4 or 5, in Olino State Park, and they were migrating towards the interstate.
They're probably quite tasty. That hunter that shot one, I hope he ate it. And of course, they are exotic, right? They don't belong here. They don't appear to be invasive at this point. You know, if there's a little population there, it may be stable. In fact, Kathy Ewell, a biologist who lives up on the river in the stretch we're talking about, has been kind of keeping an eye out for them. And she says they seem to have disappeared here lately. So who knows?
All righty. So a couple more questions about swallets, it looks like. So actually, that's a good one. Robert asks, what's the difference between a siphon and a sink?
A siphon and a sink. Well, we have sinks all over the place, right? We call them sinkholes or sinks, and they're usually just a depression in the landscape with a pool of water down at the bottom. But they can actually change function. If we go on to a period of time where the ocean levels were rising and the water levels all over Florida rose up, and the water in the sinkhole rose up above the rim or the lip of the sinkhole, they would actually start discharging water just like our springs do. On the other hand, if the water tables in Florida were declining, and they decline below the level of the spring runs, let's say Jenny Springs, if the water level dropped below the level of that run, then Jenny Springs would just sit there with no flow coming out of it, and it would be a sinkhole at that point. And the swallets are where we have sinks or springs that actually take water, and we've got a lot of them in Florida. The Cody Escarpment, which is named after the little town of Cody, it's southeast of Tallahassee. It's a erosional front for between the northern highlands and the coastal lowlands off to the west of them. And almost all the streams that try to cross the Cody Escarpment, once they get down into the limestone, they get captured and taken underground in swallet holes. The locals call these things suck holes. I prefer the French swallet. I guess it's French.
Okay, so Carla asks, is it normal for the Santa Fe to reverse flow, and how often does that happen on the Santa Fe?
Dan?
Well, I have observed it probably a half a dozen times over the years. It comes down, usually happens after a drought or a very restricted rainfall, and then you get a huge pulse of water coming down, such as when I was out there at the very end of February. The week before, Tom and I were out there running around, and it was a spring. But then when we had a little over 2 inches of rain in the basin, the water level on the river got so high that the pressure became greater and actually started shoving the water downstream. So it became a swallet because of just the way the water flows. It just could not flow up over through the overladen river.
Yeah, you know, a lot of our riverside springs become swallets at times. The Swanee River is a very, in the northern Withlacoochee River, those are both very flashy streams, and they can respond to rainfall events up in Georgia quite dramatically. Like the Alapaca River is another one of these splashy streams coming out of Georgia. It can rise up, 20 or 25 feet in a short period of time. And that's when the springs reverse flow. And this is an important kind of thing. There's actually water storage going on. Some people worry about floodwaters going out to the Gulf of Mexico and being wasted. Of course, we know it's not wasted. It supports estuaries and stuff like that. But when these springs reverse flow, that water can be shoved over 6 miles back into the landscape. And the limestone picks up a big shot of water at that point. Then when the river starts dropping back down, it's kind of like a pendulum is swinging back in the other direction. The springs reverse back out in a normal direction. And as time goes on, the brown water is shoved on out. We start picking up the clear flow again. And that's what cave divers like, right? When the water gets clear again for them.
Just to let you know, these are called estivales, where a spring can be a spring and another time it could be a swallet. If you go over in the Chasselwitzky area where they're tidal influence, you'll get springs that are coming up very nice during low tide. But once the tide shifts going to high tide, they actually all become swallets. So it is an estival system.
So David asks, what % of the water in the Santa Fe comes from recent, about the last 1 to 5 years, nearby rainfall, and how much is older water that has flowed to the spring from underground?
Gosh, that's a good question. Yeah, geologists and hydrologists over the last couple of decades have, with some of the little special techniques, have aged the water that comes out of our springs. Some of it is very recent, and a small percentage of it is very old, but the bulk of it tends to be around 25 or 30 years old. So it's had that much of a residence time right in the ground. It was 25 or 30 years since the rain fell on the landscape and worked its way towards the springs. And as to the contribution of the springs to the flow of the Santa Fe, down in the lower Santa Fe where we have so many springs, during periods of drought, almost 100% of the flow in the Santa Fe River comes from spring discharge, because the swamps and everything quit draining into the river, and it's pretty much all up to the springs to keep that flow going.
All right, so this one's a question probably for someone on the ACT staff, and that question is, can one of us talk a little bit about how ACT is going to manage the land once the purchase is complete? What kind of public access are we going to have? What kind of activities are going to be out there?
I'll answer that one since I sort of put the acquisition together. So we acquired the tract in 5 different phases from 5 different families. 4 of the 5 families were related. We have one final acquisition that's going to close. Kind of keeps moving because of the family issues. There's some title stuff. If anyone's ever had a piece of property owned jointly with siblings, you can imagine how that can play out sometimes. And so we're closed on that last one, May 5th. But that I bring all that up is because it'll probably be about a year from when we close, probably even a little bit more than that, because we don't typically like opening up a property in the summer because it tends to be really hot and not maybe the best time to go out and hike and ride your bike around on it. So we'll probably be opening up in the fall of 21. And as sort of Tom alluded in his talk, talking about the habitat there, it definitely was sort of a sandy scrub, longleaf, probably historically. And so on the uplands, which has been predominantly used for agriculture, for hay, cattle grazing, in some cases row crops, that part that's uplands will be sort of converted back to longleaf pine habitat. And we're working on getting the funding together to plant the trees for that. Whether it's this winter or the following winter, that's sort of the long-term plan on those uplands. And then as Dan sort of had in his video, there was a house on the property and there's still a couple mobile homes. And so one of the other things we'll be doing is removing those from around the spring to kind of get that cleared up and remediated some. And then we'll probably have public access. There's a road that runs down all the way down sort of towards the spring, but there's access issues as a result of some of the tidal issues I was mentioning. And so we'll like come off of County Road 18 up there, and then people will be able to hike down to the spring itself. And also we're trying to minimize the amount of cars and things like that parked around the spring. So obviously there's a major component of outdoor recreation tied to this, passive outdoor recreation tied to the property, but also habitat restoration. There's quite a few gopher tortoises and things like that. We want to ensure that the habitat continues to be good for them, and trying to improve those areas for some of the species that Tom was pointing out during his talk. So that's sort of the big component. Also trying to cut down on erosion around the things. So that's why we're talking about building a kayak launch, so that people aren't launching from a variety of different places along Alusty or even at the spring itself. We're trying to keep that as natural as possible, because so many of our springs are getting built up right at the mouth of the spring. So we're trying to minimize the amount of impact around there.
Okay, so we got a question from Brian, who said, we've paddled the lower Santa Fe recently and paddled through a small number of rapids. What is the geologic explanation for these transitions within the same limestone formation?
Oh, well, I reckon you've got some resistant layers that aren't eroding as fast as other parts of the riverbed. On the upper part, we had a photograph there in between down below I-75 going towards Olena of a nice set of shoals, right? Rapids. That's a great place. Those rapids consist of chert, which is silicon dioxide, right? The exact same thing that glass is made out of. And that's also the stuff that Indians made their tools out of. And stuff is super resistant to erosion. The limestone, the main erosive force on our limestone is chemical erosion. It just dissolves away like a sugar cube in a glass of tea. But I would imagine that the chert shoals are hundreds of times more resistant to the solutional activities of the water and other erosive forces than the limestone. So a lot of the especially in the upper part of the river, the shoals up there are going to consist of chert.
And is everybody, hopefully everybody can hear. I hear there's a little bit of a lag when Tom was responding, and hopefully y'all can hear me. There was a question from Gary that said, any plans for an ACT Morris-led outing to the area? I can answer that question since I'm the outreach coordinator. Hopefully, we'll see. We do host events at all of our preserves. Right now, we're not hosting any in-person events, and we're not quite sure when we will be back to hosting those events, but the preserve is scheduled to hopefully open within the next year. Until then, we have been leading paddles. We've been putting in on the Santa Fe River and actually paddling over to the spring. We had one scheduled for April, but unfortunately had to cancel it. I am sure Melissa and I will work very hard once things transition back to normal a little bit to hopefully host another paddle out to the spring even before we open to the public. So hopefully that answers your question, Gary. And let's see if we've got any other questions coming in. We've got about 8 minutes left. So it looks like we've got a question from Pat that says, how do nitrate or pollutant levels in this section compare to the rest of the Santa Fe? Does anyone want to take a shot at that one?
Well, all I can say is that the agricultural intensity upstream is not near as severe as farther down the river. Plus, you don't have any major towns or cities which can be affected by ornamental horticulture. that a lot of people will over fertilize. So that is one of the basic reasons I believe is because the land use above upstream is a lot less intensive than other places in the state of Florida.
Yeah, and you know, the main input of nitrogen into the lower Santa Fe River is right at the springs. So it's the groundwater source that's been contaminated. And in fact, some of the most intense filamentous algae problems are right there at the base of the springs, right at the mouth of the springs. And it's not generally as much of a problem in the upper Santa Fe, even though I have paddled up there before and seen a lot of filamentous algae. So, you know, it has its problems too.
We've got a question here from Ito. Is there hydrilla or other SAV or SAV in the spring? And before you answer, please explain to folks what SAV is in case folks are not from the area or know that term.
Yeah, well, I've got a botany background, so I'll answer that one. I've been up the river a good bit, and I haven't seen any hydrilla. I haven't seen any of the exotic and invasive submerged aquatic plants that we see further down, such as hygrophila, hydrilla, and others. So it's in pretty good shape in that respect. There's the main vegetation out there, you know, it's mainly a dark water river, so we don't have much in the way of submerged aquatic vegetation. But there's some nice lily pad beds along the side, and yeah, it's in pretty good shape.
Well, it looks like we're having a little bit of audio issues. Tom's audio is a bit fuzzy, so we apologize for that. We're dealing with all the different internet connections that we have. But again, we'll do our best to get this presentation online, and hopefully the audio will be a little bit clearer. Let's see if we've got any additional questions. We've got about 5 minutes left, so please feel free to keep adding your questions in. In the meantime, one of the questions that I was hoping Melissa could address is what other work does ACT do in and around the Santa Fe River?
Sure, that's a great question. So when Tom Kay, our executive director, first kind of teed this all up, you know, he mentioned that the Santa Fe River and its surrounding land is been a focus of ACT for 3 decades now. And my role is specific to working with private property owners in the Santa Fe River Basin. So that's the entire watershed that surrounds the Santa Fe River and its tributaries like Olustee Creek, Ichetucknee, and to help them identify options like how to consider a conservation easement, which is a tool that private property owners can use to permanently protect their lands while still living and working on that property, as well as identifying acquisition projects, right? So like Santa Fe Springs that Tom has been working really hard on these past couple of years to make happen. And so in addition to doing kind of these larger acquisition projects that turn into public preserves that we manage, ACT as an organization also works a lot with other agencies and nonprofits to help identify areas where we want to be conserving, and also to leverage our collective resources, our funding, and our knowledge to make sure that those projects come across the finish line. So when you think conserving the Santa Fe River, it's not just what's right on the riverbanks, right? Like Tom Morris and Dan have been talking about this whole time, it's a lot of what's upstream. It's properties in that entire watershed that impact the health of these places. So ACT, you know, we work in 16 counties in North Central Florida, and my focus is really on the watershed that surrounds the Santa Fe River and all the places in the basin that matter. There's amazing rivers and springs. There's also really cool wetlands and uplands and pine forests. So we have an amazing place, and I'm really grateful that together as a community, we can work to protect it.
Thanks, Melissa. We've got a few more questions that have come in. So I'm gonna ask a few more just because we've got some additional time, and then we'll close it out. We talked about turtles a little bit, and there was a follow-up question to that, and that asked, can we talk a little bit about the abundance of turtles that's in the Santa Fe and the diversity of species that we have here?
Yeah, yeah, the abundance. There's no river I can think of like the Santa Fe where you can drift down or paddle up, and in a mile you'll see several hundred turtles probably. I used to know the exact numbers. Jerry Johnson could tell us. The turtles aren't quite as numerous in the upper Santa Fe up near the springs, but there's plenty of them. And some of these turtles are protected, like the alligator snapper, and the Swanee cooter is also protected. And because of that, and the other turtles look so much like the Swanee cooter that they protected all the turtles that even look like a Swanee cooter. Yeah, it's just the best. And the basking habits of turtles is very important for them. They need to get up on those logs and warm up. And one of the worries has always been that if too many boaters go by and the turtles keep plopping into the water, they're not going to get enough basking time in. But as it turns out, the turtles get fairly used to our human presence. It's called habituation. And so you can paddle really close to them sometimes, and if you're kind of quiet and move slowly, they'll stay right perched up on those logs, and you get a fine look at them.
All righty. So we've got a few more questions. I'll just ask this very last one. We've only got a minute left. And that's from Kat. Kat asks, what's the area or square miles that is usually around a spring head?
I couldn't understand that one, Heather. Could you repeat that?
I don't know if Kat wants to elaborate or, yeah, that's the question. Just kind of like.
She was asking about the size of a spring shed. Well, it depends. Ginny Spring shed will flow all the way up towards Newberry at times. But then you get your smaller springs such as Post Springs. It is a smaller spring shed. The whole river shed of the Santa Fe Basin to Olino is 850 square miles. So any of that stuff, any of the water percolating underground could potentially be a part of some spring shed downstream.
All righty, thank you guys so much. We are at 7 o'clock. We really appreciate everybody coming and joining us today. If you feel so inclined and want to support this project, you can text Santa Fe Springs to 44321, and that will help lead you through that donation. Or you can check out our website, alachuaconservationtrust.org. And underneath our current projects, we have a page on Santa Fe Springs, so you can learn a little bit more about that project and support it if you would like to. So thank you guys for coming. And if anybody couldn't make it or if anybody arrived late, we will be posting the video online in a few days. So thank you.